and I'm going to hand off to Maisie, who is an editor at Tin House Books, one of my absolute favorite book publishers in the universe. And also, I attended the Tin House Summer Writers Workshop early on in my writing career a couple times, and that's probably the most important thing I ever did as a writer. So a lot of love for Tin House, both as a publisher and both as a literary entity. So Maisie, I'd like to just hand off to you and thank you and take it away.
Hi, welcome. I'm so happy to be here at the Writers Center. Thank you, Zach, for the nice words, both about Tin House and the Writers Workshop. And it's so good to see you, Porrick. My name is Masie Cochran, and I'm the editorial director and publisher here at Tin House. The Naming of the Birds is our third novel with Paraic O'Donnell, and I'll tell you just a little bit about it, and then welcome and introduce one of my favorite all-time authors. Um, I don't often get the delight of getting to work on a series, so it's a thrill for me to be back with the incredible cast from Paraic O'Donnell's first and best-selling novel, The House on Vesper Sands. Um, this book is amazing. It was published to raves. It drew comparisons to David Mitchell, Wilkie Collins, Conan Doyle, Charles Dickens, and Oscar Wilde. And I feel so lucky that you've joined us. And Porrick, all the way from Ireland here on our publication day to celebrate the naming of the birds. Such a gorgeous book jacket. Doesn't do it justice here, but this novel is everything. It has the same breakneck page flying clip. It's chock full of everything you could have asked for in the Victorian London world of Inspector Cutter and Sergeant Bliss. And I have to say, there were also things, Porrick, that I couldn't even have dreamed to ask for, like a wide assortment of throwing knives, a young girl turned assassin on the level of Uma Thurman in Kill Bill. And I will tell you that my experience of reading this book was active and totally visceral. There is a fierce feminist slant to the telling that left me, like, for lack of a better word, pumped up and kind of inspired in a take no prisoners kind of way. I was kind of weird around the office for a while, a little intense. But I mean, it was an amazing feeling. And I could talk about this book all day, but better, let's hear from the acclaimed author, essayist, and critic, Paraic O'Donnell. Paraic is the author of The Maker of Swans. I love this book too. The House on Vesper Sands, and The Naming of the Birds. His essays and reviews have appeared in The Guardian, The Irish Times, Winter Papers, and elsewhere. Hi, Porrick. It's an honor to
Hi,
be with
Maisy.
you. It's good to see
It
you.
an honor. Don't be silly. Come on. Come on. We go
Yeah,
back. We go back now.
we do, and I have to say, you've helped me through. We've whether pandemic times, political times, children times. I mean, we've
Not so
really.
much recently. I
Not,
wasn't much help on that night,
oh,
but
you really were, actually. You were one of the few authors texting me, and I really appreciated that, honestly.
yeah.
Nancy and I actually were texting back and forth. Pork says it's going to be okay. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I
okay.
mean, in a general sense, in the most general
Yeah.
possible sense, I was
Yeah, you were. I told my
Yeah.
10-year-old son, and he
Yeah.
took
Yeah.
comfort in it. He was like, okay,
Yeah.
it's going to
Yeah.
be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a big feat for you here. I mean, it's like it's the middle of the night, and is it as cold where you are as it
It
is in the United States?
it is unusually, actually, unusually it is properly cold here because normally what we have in Ireland is we have a kind of uni season. We have um a sort of drizzle filled pervasive grayness that extends just uniformly from December right through to January. And, it's all very uneventful and soothing, and everyone's fine with it, But we now have sometimes, gentle actual seasons, and we're having an actual winter at the moment, which is very bracing. We have -5, I think, tonight, which
Oh,
is,
wow.
I appreciate that by, you know, um, you know, parts of the US, the standards of parts of the US, that's kind of baby stuff, but still, yeah, it's pretty chilly. But I know nothing about it. As you can see, I'm cocooned in my little writing lair here, um, where I tend to spend far too much of my time. Um,
Well, we're all
uh,
glad that you do spend quite
yes,
a bit of time in there.
yes, indeed, yeah, and where I will be spending more time, indeed. but yes, to talk about the naming of the birds, which you have just done a far better job than I fear I can, summing up. Um, but what we can do, I guess, is begin by reading from it,
I'd love
just a
that.
little bit,
Yeah.
just to give people a sense of it. And I'll just read very briefly from the opening chapter. You can tell I've done this before, can't you? The children are taken far away after the fire, and they are given new names. One morning, they are led from their dormitories and made to line up in the passageway. Maybe it's the first morning, or maybe it is later. Everything is strange here, and they have no hold on the days yet. The girls stand on one side, and the boys on the other. The nurse tells them to stand up straight, even those swaying on crutches. Stand up straight for the master, she says, though the lean man in the dark robes is bent over a book and seems to take no notice. The light is hung with dust, and the children are hushed when they cough. Some cannot stop. Their breathing is still bad. When the children have taken their places, the master opens his book. When he speaks, he is looking at above their heads. This is a great day, he says, a momentous day. And I'll leave it there in the interests of brevity.
I got chills, Pork. That's great. And I remember the first time I read this, I was very close to the opening. Um, and I'm always curious, is that where you actually started?
It is, in fact, that is effectively, and this tends to happen. This has been a pattern with me um, from the first book. The everything else gets, as you know very well, you know, because you're intimately involved in that part of the process. Everything else gets everything else is up for grabs, and everything else tends to get changed extensively, you know, both structurally and, you know, right down at line level. But for whatever reason, um, maybe because it's connected to, I don't really have a process, and I kind of distrust that word because it's too fancy. It tends to mystify things a bit more than I like. But um, if I did have a process, it would involve, because I think, relatively highly visual as a writer, and the way that I approach a subject, the way that I approach a theme, always tends to be visual in the first instance. So I tend to start with not so much an image as I guess something more, not so much a still image, I mean, as something more complete and almost cinematic, in the sense that there's, you know, um, there are four dimensions, you know, there's time and space and everything else. But anyway, I start out with a very strong, we'll use the word image for the sake of convenience, of place, of a very strong sense of place, and almost nothing else. And that's what I had in this instance. But I did have the children, and I did have the institution, and I did have the names. And the fun part always is, you know, working out, well, you know, how did they get here? Because that tends to be the way I approach things. I'm not at all meticulous in terms of planning. I couldn't even begin to write a, you know, a schema for a novel. I have no idea how that would work. But I greatly admire, you know, those writers who do have that discipline, and, you know, who do approach it in that way. But I couldn't. Where were we? You see, this is
Well,
why
that's
I leave
really,
it to you, because you know, this is why writers shouldn't be allowed to talk. This is my strong view,
no,
and I've aired it before, and still these events are happening. We just shouldn't be allowed. I mean, generally to leave the house, but certainly to do events. It's a bad idea.
No,
Um,
Park, I love it. And I have to say, I learn something every time we do this because it shocks me
yes, you learn
that
that it's a bad idea. Yeah.
no, I've learned more. I know you don't like the word process, but I have to say, as someone who's read all of your work, your essays and your criticism, that it shocks me that you wouldn't describe your approach as meticulous, because when you read the book, and certainly the reviews, I think meticulous is used all the time. When the ship, the string is pulled and the ship stands up at the bottle
Mhm.
at the end, it feels very meticulous. And it's very interesting to me that you do more of the sort of questioning approach. Why are they here? And I think readers approach your work in the same way. That's really, I love learning these things because I saw um a pretty finished draft of this, and so it to me would be described as meticulous.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other um I mean, look, I don't want to be I don't want to be glib either. I guess, there is certainly, and I'm not suggesting either that, that there's no craft involved, because I guess that's kind of the theme of the discussion, or the theme of these talks. Um so, obviously craft is involved. All of it is craft at one level or another, and certainly everything is kind of highly mediated. But I do think it's interesting that those um, those first few pages always tend to survive, even at line level, relatively untouched. I'm curious myself, and I wonder if that's true for other writers. Uh, how common that is and why exactly that is. Is there something about, and maybe it's probably something that's like I said, that's a function of the way that I work, but I'm curious nonetheless. Is there something, is there a kind of essential quality to that initial, maybe the germ is in a different place for every writer. Maybe
Yeah.
the kind of, the secret heart of the book might be somewhere else for a different, for a different novel, for a different writer, but it will be somewhere, and it will have that quality. It's been there from the very beginning, and it's been untouched, and possibly in some cases only the writer knows it's there, and it's the secret germ of the story that that everything else kind of formed around. But yeah, that's how it was for me. And there is, everything else that you talked about, um, all of the, if you like, the upholstery, the sort of the window dressing. And I don't mean that in a kind of, um, in a negative or derogatory way necessarily. I mean, I'm just talking about, the formal requirements. Some of those are imposed by the the form itself. So, and in this case, we're talking about multiple forms. We're talking about period fiction. We're talking about Victorian, but we're also talking about detective fiction, which comes with its own set of expectations. And all of these things come with their sets of conventions, which obviously not going to be observing slavishly, but even if you're doing something interesting or something fresh with them, you still have to, observe them, if you like. So there's lots of stuff that you're constantly paying attention to, um, that can, I guess, create that impression of something that is highly worked at. But yeah, the process itself is utterly chaotic. I'm happy to report. Um, what
Fascinating.
I do have is a tidy desk, a chaotic process, but a tidy desk, because for some reason I can't, like, even these things here are, misaligned, and it's causing me upset. So yeah. There's another revelation for you,
Yeah,
since
see,
we're
I
since
didn't. I
yeah
think that
since
one,
we're
I after
since
all
we're
these years,
making since we're
I might have
making with the
guessed.
tea, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I might have guessed that after reading
since we're
so much
filling
of your work.
tomorrow's gossip columns. Yeah.
Yeah. the big reveal. But I
Yeah.
love what you say about the constraints, because you're right. It's historical, it's a procedural in some ways. So you have these constraints on it. And for the first time in anything I've read of yours, it had the added conceit or the added sort of maybe stricture of being a sequel. And even
Mm.
though it can totally be read alone, I'm curious if you knew that there was going to be a sequel, and if 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 you didn't, once you found yourself in that predicament of writing it, were there things that surprised you about writing a story in which, maybe finishing a puzzle in which people already had quite a few pieces?
Yes. And so to answer the first question, that I didn't know that I would be writing a sequel because, of course, you never take anything for granted in this business. I wrote the first one more or less. I mean, I've described the process, so it couldn't have been anything but accidental. I certainly didn't start out with the intention to write even a standalone work of uh, Victorian Gothic detective fiction, let alone a series. So no, none of it was um, in any way premeditated. Um, but yes, what there were certainly challenges and peculiarities that I came across that were um, that were unexpected. I think most of them are are, are sort of less. Um, um, Most of them are less interesting than and more mechanical than you might expect. Um, a lot of it is to do with managing the issue of, for example, fan service, as you might call it. How much do you um, how much do you want to reward or acknowledge the presence of those readers who have, you know, um, um, because obviously, as you said, it is a standalone, it works as a standalone. But you are aware that you are obviously you're hoping to reach new readers, but aware that there is this modest community of people who have formed relationships with these characters, and you want to be sure that their experience is satisfying, and you know is also, because a lot of I think the a lot of the satisfaction, a lot of the pleasure that we get from not just fiction, but any successful work of art. I think when we sit down or go to a museum or a gallery, whatever whatever the setting is, when we set out to experience a piece of art, um, we obviously approach it with um, a set of expect. I think I've entirely forgotten the point that I was making, possibly because it's so late. Where can you help me out, Maisie? Where were
No,
we?
I
Where were
we
we
were
going
talking
with this?
about we were talking about um sequels and sort of
Sequels. That's what
what
it
you're
was.
expected.
That's what
But
it
I
was.
think I maybe if I can, you know, add something here, because I remember when I read your interview with Lee Child a few years back, and it kind of turned on a light bulb for me much later when I had then read The Naming of the Birds, because I don't work on a lot of series, but I have read a lot of series before,
Mm,
and they can kind of feel fall into almost a paint by numbers, especially if there's so many of them, and for some readers, there's a comfort in that. But for me, what I was so delighted by was how different. And like, even though you have your same players and the things that they were contending with were very
mm,
different, even though we don't find them that much later
mm,
in sequence. And in that interview, you said, I think crime and mystery novels aren't necessarily or fundamentally about solving the case or getting the bad guys. In some way, deep down, they're always about uncertainty of a kind or another. And
mm,
I think because you weren't like so focused, even though I love the procedural qualities and the
mhm,
whodunits and the bad guys, even though the bad guys are very conflicting and uncertain at times, but uncertainty is clearly a driving theme, to use our
Yeah.
craft language here.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, sure. And it's funny that you mentioned the Lee Child interview because that was a really it was a really rich and wide-ranging conversation. I obviously, Lee Child being Lee Child, it can't fail to be interesting. So I do recommend that people go and check that out. It's on Crime Reads. I'm sure you can Google it. But yeah, we touched on a lot, and yeah, I was delighted to find that Lee is a very cogent and lucid speaker, as you know. So he's a very rewarding interview subject, and he had lots of interesting thoughts on all of those things, and especially on the question of managing a series. One of the things that he said was vital to um, um, safeguarding the Reacher series from sort of veering into soap opera isms was he was touching on this question of the recurrence of characters and how he manages that very carefully. He doesn't want to have he's very cautious about having recurring characters because that's a kind of soapy trope. There are one or two, but they really have to work quite hard to earn their place. And I suppose something of that may have crept into um, crept into my approach. Um, honestly, I'd be lying if I said that I had anything like the level of I think one of the things that we're really good at as a species, and I think I'm no behaviorist, but I think the behaviorists have pretty good account of how we do this. We're extremely good at accounting for our past actions, and I think one of the things that writers do especially is we create backstories for our own work, that are satisfying. We create origin stories for our own ideas that are kind of satisfying, that have satisfying narrative arcs of their own, but they don't bear any resemblance to what actually happens when you're at work. Um, so yeah, I think that honestly, um, I did what I always do when I'm writing a book, which is try to um, try to convey all of the chaotic forces that are going on in any particular moment. You mentioned the throwing knives, and you mentioned the orphan assassins and all these things, which can make it sound like a I mean, there is a lot going on at certain points. It's true. There's a lot of there's a lot happening on set, as it were, at any given time. That there is a lot to manage. Honestly, I think that possibly more than anything was what rescued me um from the perils of the sequel was the fact that I'd just bitten off so much, I think, from from a thematic um and subject point of view that I just had far too much to do to be worrying about series pacing, and if it worked out, great. And if it didn't, well, there's always the next book, I guess.
What's the next book?
Well,
Is that a secret?
yeah, I think we have to be somewhat circumspect,
Yeah.
other than to say that there'll be one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm as curious as everyone in this room.
Yeah.
So, but I loved one of the things that was interesting to me in your answer was, you were saying it's one of the things that saved you, having bitten that off and thinking about all of those things. And I love the idea of allowing your brain to go into these places that I think you said bear no resemblance of what actually happened. But a thing that your books get praised time and time again, and something that certainly appeals to me, is that the mood and the atmosphere and the historical details feel, at least, incredibly accurate and fun. And I know that there was a ton of research that you do and have done for, many, many years. And I'm curious if there was anything that you stumbled upon in your research that caused a strong reaction in you, either of delight or disgust or just anything, in of this series, or even I know in Maker of Swans, there's quite a bit of interesting detail.
All the time. I'm very bad at retrieving interesting um, interesting anecdotes of that kind from my research. But yes, things like that crop up constantly. And the research is it's real, and I don't want to I don't want to turn this into a lecture, but um, I hope I suppose I hope that um, I'm not an academic. I'm not a historian. Um, I suppose that there's a difficult balancing act that we try to pull off. Um, as it feels odd to say, as historical novelists, it feels odd to sort of play, place myself in that category. But I suppose for these purposes, that's what I am. And I think what we're doing is we are sort of laying claim to a certain amount, a certain we are laying claim to a certain status, and this goes back to an idea that I began but didn't quite finish when I was answering one of your other questions, which is that I think one of one of the most important components of a reader's pleasure in encountering a text is their sense of assurance. And what I mean by that is their sense of assurance that the writer knows what he or she is doing, and that every effect that is achieved on the page is considered. And that assurance is something that very often, and we've all experienced this at the bookshop, that assurance can emerge remarkably quickly, and then sometimes it almost immediately. In some cases, a strong first line. In some rare cases, can even establish that assurance, that bond of trust. So what you're doing, that's what you're doing always in a general sense as a writer, is giving the reader the assurance that not just that they're in for a good time, but that also that what's happening at every level, from the micro to the macro, so from line level right up to the larger structural details of plot. And also, critically, to return to your question, the questions of accuracy, you are entering into a kind of pact with the reader, and you are giving them to understand that although this is a work of fiction, this is an artwork, to get highfalutin about it, uh, that there is only so far that you will go um, in the service of artistic license, and that certain things are sacrosanct. So, for example, and this maybe qualifies as an example of an interesting tidbit that I encountered in research. So, for Vesper Sands, one practical difficulty that I encountered was the fact that passenger trains didn't have compartments until, in fact, 1891, from memory. I am working from memory though, so I may be corrected. And I needed a scene in a train compartment because, of course, train compartments are, wonderfully convenient for writers and directors and all kinds of creatives. Uh, but they weren't, while they had been invented and they were in production, they weren't in use on the train line that I was concerned with at that time. So that was an instance where I had to I had to go so far as to mention it in the acknowledgements at the end. So I had to say that, while those compartments had been invented and did exist and were in fact, I think at the time they would not have been in use on that train on that day, which I thought was about as much as one can do, in the interests of correctness. So uh, that's kind of explicit assurance, but I think most of the time what you're doing is very much the opposite of that because you absolutely don't want to um, you don't want to you don't want to hose your reader with research. Um, you want it to be it's almost like that tip that everyone gives you for getting dressed for parties, turn around in front of the mirror and whatever catches your eye, take it off. I don't know if that advice is still if is still current, but I do something kind of like that with historical detail. And it's something that I do kind of read attentively for more generally as well is, if we're reading, and this is especially important I mean it's important in all fiction, I think, but what the character notices should be something that the character has a reason to notice. And it shouldn't just be we want to avoid I think uh, Donna Tartt plays with this in one of her I think in the Goldfinch she plays with this because she has a scene that goes on for pages. It's a very Donna Tartt sort of showcase scene. So it goes on for pages and pages and pages, and it's as itemizing the contents of a curiosity shop, antique shop type. Anyway, it's all very 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 um, colorful, and obviously because of the nature of the setting and the period, it's crammed with artifacts and crammed with curios and all of that. And I think what she was doing there was maybe almost sending up that tendency that we have, in historical fiction to constantly cram the frame with 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 reproduction, well, not reproduction, but with with Louis Kahn's bureau, and all of this stuff that is that all looked so wonderful in your research and on your mood boards, but maybe doesn't all need to be on the page at the same time. So those tensions, resolving those tensions are part of the fun, but very much part of the discipline, I think, as well. Um, and again, I have no idea what the question was or what we were talking about.
Well,
But
I like that idea of, taking one thing off the thing that catches your eye. I can't remember.
yeah.
So this isn't very interesting because I can't remember the author who said it, but I was in a panel one time where an author said, when you're doing research, it's like collecting tea leaves and you're like, ooh,
Mhm.
and you keep collecting all these tea leaves, but at the end of the day, you just have to make a good cup of tea. And I thought that was very helpful of thinking about what to choose and what to not choose, what to not dilute. But
Mhm.
I was very moved by something that you said about assurances, offering an assurance in fiction, because I love that idea of this assurance that all of this really happened. So, believe me. But we understand from the very beginning, even, says a novel,
Mhm.
that none of
Mhm.
it actually happened. But these assurances that authors give, and you mentioned that sometimes assurances can be offered by the first line. And I will say here, this is be my last question, and then there's some great questions in the chat. I'll move on to those. But your first line, you read at the beginning, but I'm going to recap for people who came in a little late. It says, "The children are taken far away after the fire, and they are given new names." And I had to get to this question because I never got to ask you this in our editorial conversations. But I love the idea of names, epithets. It's been around forever. This idea
Mhm.
of naming and choosing names, and both Cutter and Bliss feel so perfect to their characters. And then here you start with this iconic female character whose name is taken from her. And I was just really curious and it's in our title, the naming of the birds. And I was just curious to you, what draws you to names and to naming, or is it just something I fell in love with?
No, it's not just you, and it is such a rich vein. I could talk all night. Yeah, I am. So first of all, names are a special category of words, obviously, but there's so much more than that, right? Because names are, we invest, especially when we talk about, the names of people, the names of uh not just characters, but of people, of individuals. Names are obviously and automatically charged. These are not just words. These are words that carry special charges, and more in a more prosaic way. We all have a set of associations. For any given name. Um, yeah, you will have a set of particular memories, and those memories will behave in the very strange and sort of ramified and refracted way that memories do. um, and they will, clink together, and they will interact with other memories, and you will have a reaction to this name and not that name. You will find this name pleasing and euphonious, but not that name. You will find this name exotic sort of and so on. So yeah, names are. I spend not that I spend a lot of time on them, but I am deeply preoccupied with them, I guess. Um, and it's always struck me as curious. For example, and I think there's a lot that could be said about this, but that um, and not just in the Anglophone tradition, not just in the English speaking world, but in many cultures, I think it is the case that um, women's names and girls' names are doing very different jobs culturally. They are, so we have certain kind of linguistic features that we can have a different conversation about. So we have, the formation of, derivatives and diminutives and so on, and the ways in which, those linguistic processes are, othering or, reducing um, women, in kind of subtextual ways. So you have all of those processes going on. But at a more superficial level, we have all of these names that, in the culture, in the canon, that have accumulated over these years. And the ones that we have for women and girls have a far more complex and shimmering freight of associations. They just do. We have, for men, okay, we have, plenty of names with, dignity and gravitas, but that's mostly by association with, political authority and, kings, for example. Um, whereas we have all kinds of things going on with women's names. So that is a very long and way off trail answer to the question, but it is deeply fascinating, and obviously um, that the scenario you're describing where children are taken and their their names the which obviously are foundational to their identities are stripped away. What happens in that case, and obviously what happens in most instances, involving real children is, well, deep trauma happens. But, in Nightingale's case, something else happens because, um, her trauma response, to use the kind of, you know, to use a whole other mode of discourse that would be alien to her. Her trauma response is unlike is unlike anyone else's, and um her psychological composition, I suppose, and um her particular set of attributes is such that she is um she obviously um I think one thing that would be fair to say is that um um one thing that isn't a spoiler, for to put it slightly differently, is that um Nightingale is is still her name, if that makes sense. Nightingale is the one thing from that entire experience that look, I've gone far from the point, and it's very late. I'm going to need you to
We're,
rescue me,
we're
Maisie,
so
with
close. And
our
again, I think sort of the things you find winding are incredibly satisfying because I also thought that Nightingales did have her name, mostly because she made a name for herself very much,
yes.
um, which I loved. And I actually have a lot more questions that I had prepared, but you and I can catch them over
Hmm.
tea at a much more reasonable hour. And there are some good ones in the chat. So I think we have time for maybe two. Um, and you can look in the chat too, Pork. But one of them that caught my eye was because I know you can, and by you, I do mean you. The
No.
question says, can you start a novel with an action scene? Which immediately I put it in the chat, made me think of Maker of Swans that actually begins with a gunshot. Um,
Yes.
and
Yes, and that
quite a
was
bit
a
of
and that was a kind of in joke, if you like. So the so I'm not sure if the question is being asked in 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 jest. If not, if this person is asking as a matter of technique, as a matter of craft, then I can only then I can only offer my opinion, which is absolutely why not. Um, um, and you might argue more strongly that it must begin with an action, because what else is there? Even speech is action. But anyway, uh, the point that I wanted to make about the Maker of Swans was that what I was doing there was not just opening with an action, but opening with a cliche, which was a shot rang out, because that, of course, is I mean, I don't. the, the, there almost certainly are many novels that begin with those particular um, um, words, but they are obviously so calcified, so petrified as a cliche, that they now are recognizable in their own right. Anyway, what I was trying to do in my sort of smart ass kind of um, too much time on my hands kind of way was to toy with that, to toy with that trope about naivety in authors, and see if you could make it work. And obviously I have no idea if it did or not, but that was the idea, was to take the shot rang out opening, which obviously is a is a clanging cliche, and try to um revivify it, and it would help if I could say the word. Never mind, perform the action. But
No,
yes,
but
that
it
was
does
my
work, and even like what you're saying is too, even though the naming of the birds doesn't begin with a gunshot, it sure does begin with a lot of implied action. Like a whole
yeah.
lot of stuff has happened very,
Yeah. Well,
very recent.
we have the concept of performative verbs for a reason. When we talk about performative verbs, we are talking about um, not just often um, a grammatical category, but something that is that has an effect the in the real world. I now pronounce the husband and wife. That's a performative verb in the most literal sense. And of course, the action of stripping somebody's name is similarly performative. So yeah, those are actions, and any again, just to stick with the theme of craft and just the dynamics and the mechanics of how characters interact and how scenes develop. You're not just, I mean, sometimes you know cards on the table, I am just playing with words because I really like them, and they're so pretty and shiny, and there are so many to collect, and um, you know, I, I'm a writer. That's what we do. It's sad, but it's relatively harmless, and we collect pretty words, and we you know put them together and make new shiny things from them. So yeah, a lot of the time that's what I'm doing. But um, again, remind me what the question
Well, I think you
was.
answered
If
it
there,
perfectly.
did I? Did
Yeah,
I?
yeah. And you see writers do opening scenes with varying degrees of action, high,
Yeah,
high and
yeah.
more lower.
I do like a cold open, though. I do like a cold open, just to give a slightly more maybe full-throated answer to that person. Yes, absolutely, open with an action. I like a cold open, and that doesn't have to be a sort of HBO cold open, although absolutely it can be. But yeah, yeah, something should happen. If nothing else, you'll have set yourself a challenge, because you will have to explain it. You will have to account for it. If only to yourself, you will have to, again, um, figure out how this person got here, how this happened, and, how they're going to um, get out of it. Yeah. Also, make sure it's something bad, because, something good happening, you know,
Might
that's
not be as
you don't
interesting.
you don't have a book. That's just, yeah, that's just I mean,
That's a greeting card.
yeah, something good happens. Yeah, just call your mom. But
Yeah.
yeah, you don't have a book. You have it. You have a good news story.
Well, I think we have one more, and I'm going to do my best to mash it inelegantly from some of the questions that are in there.
Yeah.
But I love what you say about, and you can tell that your joy of writing in all three of these books.
Hmm.
I learned words. I think still maybe you make up some words that are glorious. That
No, I don't. No, no, never. No,
no,
not, no, no, no.
no.
I mean, not knowingly. No, I mean, apart
No,
from
but I mean,
character
they're
names.
really, really gorgeous language. That's always been a thing that people have been drawn to. And, one of the questions here is since you don't write with an outline and you kind of see your way
Hmm.
through, some people in the chat find that that might be very stressful and are curious if you enjoy it. Do you enjoy
It's
it?
it's yeah, it's incredibly liberating at the beginning, and yes, incredibly stressful at the end. Uh, but I'm not going to lie to you. It is inordinately stressful at the end, and you know I should have made this clear at the outset. I, I'm not advising this. I'm not I'm not suggesting that if you're because God forbid that this should be interpreted as advice. Um, I'm simply giving a sort of frank accounting of the sad turn of events that brought us to this. You know, this is how um, this is how I managed with, you know, my particular bag of tricks. I would recommend that you know, you maybe plan just a little bit more than I do, because it does, yeah. But by the time you get to the end, you have an awful lot to do. You have a huge amount of just, you know, what I think of as plumbing to do. You know, making sure that you know, events line up and that timelines line up, and that, you know, person A was physically capable of being transported to location B, you know, in the time available. All of that stuff has to be figured out, and you know, all of that is very tedious because that's all time that you could be spending, you know, looking up new pretty words. So yeah, all of that is time consuming and laborious, but uh, you know, it has to be done at, you know, at one end of the process or the other. So it's, you know, I guess it's all about, you know, what works best for you.
Well, that's wonderful. And I think we've taken you from midnight, edging you into the morning hours. So I hope
Mm,
you'll be able to, go to bed. And I just want to say before Zach takes things back over, it was good to see you, Porrick, and so nice to
you
be here
too.
with so many great readers as an independent publisher.
Thanks so much to
Tin
everyone who
House,
joined.
yeah, you mean so much to us. And we're glad you were here on this frigid evening with us. And thank you so much also to Zach and the Writers Center.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks to both of you. That was amazing and insightful and wonderful. It's great to get to know you both a little bit here this evening, and hopefully, well, Maisie, I might see you around. I don't know, Puerto Rico, if you'll ever be back in, or you'll be over here on a stateside, but if so, I hope that we cross paths. And everyone who came out this evening, thank you so much for your time. Please get a copy of the book if you're able. It sounds absolutely amazing, and I'm excited to get my copy and begin reading
Mm.
it as well. So thanks to everyone.